Oh, hey, John.
Oh,
Solomon.
Nick,
You're back.
wonderful to
Solomon's
be
here
with
too.
you both.
Woo.
Oh, so
Fancy
great
meeting
to
you
have
here.
you back again. So great to have you back
It's
again.
an honor to be here. I don't know how I made it here. I feel like an imposter, but you two are letting me feel right at home.
Oh, it's great to talk to you. There's so much wonderful stuff we talked about last time. We had to have you back on.
Thank you.
Solomon.
I've got a lot to learn. I've a lifetime of learning ahead of me, I hope.
As do we. Already learned so much. So if you haven't watched part one of this interview with the author Solomon Schmidt, go that way. Look at part one. This is part two of the interview. We had such a great time. We learned so much wonderful stuff last time. We had to invite Solomon back on. Solomon Schmidt has written what is going to be the definitive interview of J.K. Rowling, A Pen to Change the World. It's a wonderful book, something really everyone that is invested in our channel needs to read.
Really, I'm going to interrupt, Nick. You said
Yeah.
the definitive interview. You meant the definitive biography.
Of course.
And the basically Solomon had his hands tied from the start in that Rowling would not participate, and all those people in her circle would not participate. And so you start off with not one hand tied behind your back, but essentially the barriers to a a critical biography with all resources available, say like the Tolkien biographies now or the Lewis biographies now, any author's biography is dead, where everything is wide open. What Solomon has done is write a synthesis of everything which is currently available and looked at as much as possible the books in light of those things. But that wasn't his aim. His aim was to present the biographical material and the testimony that's in the interview thing. Now, where we left off last time, and I want to jump right into this because we haven't got Solomon that long. You didn't get to interview Rowling, but you did have access to all of her interviews that she's done 1997 to the present.
Yes.
As well as the interviews and articles with her family, friends, fans, business associates, which is a mountain of material. How did you find? Because I mean, it used to be that, believe it or not, almost all of that was in one spot at Accio Quotes, but
Right.
That's no longer true.
Right.
How did you find, assemble, and sift through all those interviews?
It's a delight to discuss these things with you both, because I think you both and your listeners are people who will have an interest in hearing about these efforts that I made that to me were just a lot of work and grind, but especially to you both, having studied JK in depth for, in John's case, 30 years, and Nick, I know, for a long time. Accio Quote was priceless. I read almost every, if not every, interview on that site. I took a number of months where, before I even began writing the book, I immersed my head, as David McCullough said, I marinated my head in everything I could read that she had herself testified to about herself or her books. So the Accio Quote archive was invaluable. God bless the people who did that. My word.
Did you contact Lisa? Lisa Bunker is the single most important person in Accio Quotes.
Okay.
Do you have any contact with Lisa?
No, and maybe I should have.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
She has secrets. She has secret
Okay.
archives she could have shared with you. But anyway, go
That'll
on.
be the next biography. Someone, or maybe a future edition. Who knows? So, Accio Quote was invaluable. I read dozens and dozens and dozens of interviews there from, as I've explained to folks who aren't familiar with the site, literally June 1997 when JK found herself unwillingly on the front cover of the newspapers in the UK, or the third page or whatever it was, up until sadly 2007, I think, is when it cut off with some additional interviews afterwards. I think there were some from 2008 on the site, maybe a little later. But those 10 years, obviously, Accio had those extremely well covered, and you both know the extensive ways that they not what's the verb form of topic, not topicize, arranged in topic all the characters, people from her books. And of course, there are fascinating tidbits about her life. I remember the day I read the interview from 2003, I think it is, where she was talking about Arthur Weasley and how she decided not to kill him off, and that he was the father figure everyone wanted, including me. And she said that publicly, and it was like, my gosh. So tidbits like that, where the slog of reading through interview after interview and rereading them and reading every single word. And you gentlemen know the difference between reading and getting through it, and reading every word and reading and rereading until you hopefully can somewhat understand what's going on there. So anyway, Accio quote, yes. I got to thank Patricio Tarantino, who I communicated with throughout the project. The fact that he was able to publish almost every piece of work that she has written that is available online, whether she's acknowledged it or not. I know she had the horoscopes that John and Nick discovered, and so documents like that.
Patricio discovered
that was Patricio's discovery.
Patricio.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, so including documents like that for folks who aren't familiar. Sadly, Patricio's site is now gone. He had to take it down. Yeah. I asked Patricio if that was because JK came after him legally. He didn't say. So I have to wonder. I don't know. But it's a shame. So I made a note in the bibliography about that, which was basically, hey, these Rowling library links worked at the time when I was researching. So that the Rowling library, the site that was up, for people who aren't familiar, had access to as everything she's ever published that we know of and could get our hands on, that Patricio could find, from essays to short stories to interviews to like writing down approximately when she had published, exactly when she had published the Harry Potter books and the chapters in the individual books. So that was extremely helpful to see in a chronological order and read through and reread through multiple times all those pages, especially the interviews he found and saved that she gave about her mother, Anne. Those were exceptionally useful primary resources to me. There were at least 2 or 3 very critical interviews that Patricio cataloged that JK gave about her mother, Anne, that really helped me, I think, or at least I tried to describe the scene, make people try and feel something of what it would have felt like to be in Church Cottage when Anne was paralyzed and living on the ground floor and stuck in the sitting room in her chair, to feel what it might have been like to be on the other end of the phone when Anne was saying she might not be alive to see JK get married and all of that. So needless to say, Patricio's site was invaluable for not just that, but also his timeline was very useful. And other features of his site, which I'm devastated are not available anymore for people going forward. So
you've got the URLs to the Rowling library, and those things are available through the web archive.
Right.
But it's just not, you can't click on it and pop it up. But.
Right. So that was the Rowling library. And then in terms of, because I calculated, I probably read through or consulted a couple or a few thousand articles. It was so extensive that I had to put a QR code in the bibliography, which links to a website where people can go and see a PDF of every single article link I read or consulted for the book. So what I would do is, once I had figured out the topics, the people, the places, the events for each chapter, I would do in-depth Google searches with JK's name tagged next to whatever the topic might have been. If it's Chepstow Castle, JK Rowling, Chepstow Castle, and pour through every single mention that I could find of those different topics. Some of them, it was impossible to go through all of them. Obviously, if you type in J.K. Rowling, Harry Potter, you can't go through them all. But certain searches were possible. J.K. Rowling, Jack Thorne, John Tiffany. And that's how the Cursed Child interviews came up. I found the transcript of their CBS interview and their interview on, there were a number of different places. They did an extensive interview with The Guardian. All those were extremely useful. And then if people wonder who read the book, oh my gosh, how did you take us inside the writing sessions and writing rooms? Well, the interviews were there, and they talked about the jokes they were cracking, and they talked about JK's comments as part of the manuscript. And of course, resources, even ones that you think you wouldn't necessarily find super useful, things like Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, the behind the scenes book. Well, occasionally on page 91, there was some little joke or reference that JK made, or some email exchange between her and Jack Thorne. And oh my gosh, didn't expect to find this. It's emails between Jack Thorne and JK Rowling that they willingly published. Okay. So you quote from that. So that's how I would find the articles I would need. And then I had the time to read through them, and I would nail down what topics were going to be covered, and what could fit in the narrative. Because you both know this book, it could have been 1,000 pages. So I had to cut out certain topics. As we've discussed, I made a decision to let people consult, John's books and other books for literary criticism, rather than try and tell them that I'm going to give them some kind of profound insights of literary criticism there. So that was how I found the articles. And then I have a few different mechanisms. I'm not sure how you do it, John, not sure how you do it, Nick, when you write, but for collating the material and funneling it, I have a document I call the grocery store, which for the JK book, it was almost 1 million words. And essentially it was every fact about every topic categorized. That's the word I was searching for earlier, categorized. So again, Chepstow Castle, every fact that I had found that would be useful potentially, with the citation, so that later when I made the source notes and bibliography, I could do that. And when I was writing, I would consult the grocery store, and all the facts would be there already cited, and then, collate from there. And so that is how I sifted through them. I read the articles, sometimes reread them, and any relevant facts into the grocery store, categorized, and from there go on writing. I don't know any other way to write. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that, because if I sat down and just tried to write it from memory, it would be inaccurate, and I wouldn't remember essential or quirky or interesting details that I save in that document, and then break up into subcategories.
Yeah, I do not have what I always refer to as the magisterial command of the interview material. And the only people I know that really have that command are Beatrice Groves.
Yes.
Nick's laughing because it's a closed set.
Yeah.
I mean, Beatrice, Professor Groves pulls out interview material, Nick, that I'm just like, wow, I have read that article. I have read that interview, but man, to be able to pull that out of the sky. And that's a sign of a certain academic training and native facility that is so rare today. I mean, in the Rowling community, as I said, it's again almost a category of one. That because it's so large and it's so varied. It's just as Rowling. I mean, they did a Dylan biopic where they had like 4 different actors playing Dylan through his life, because there was like 4 different Dylan characters. And I think Rowling, Nick, you said there's like 7 lives of J.K. Rowling, 7 periods of her life, and you would need a different actress for every one of those. And she's getting progressively younger, oddly enough, as she goes on, I mean, in appearance at least. And that's, I mean, you figured out how to do it. You did it not only by close study and narrowing your study. I mean, I visited James Thomas several times at Pepperdine when he was teaching there. He's retired now. And I would always go into his office because he has this magnificent library, bookshelves like this, surrounding walls. And one of the bookshelves had, I think, every book ever published on Harry Potter.
Wow.
Not to include the juvenile stuff, but the serious works. And I had a whole bunch of those too, Nick. I mean, and so I really thought that I had a pretty good library. I had a good, section of the library on critical works about Harry Potter. No, nothing close to James Thomas. And James, he had, reference to those things. He knew exactly where to go on whatever subject.
Yeah.
That to me was mind blowing. And then he wrote a book on like every literary reference inside Harry Potter, unpotting Harry Potter. That was one, hilarious because James has a wicked sense of humor, but also just reflected his lifetime of reading. Now you're a very young man, and I'm a person that's really coming into this relatively late. I even though I've been doing it for not 30 years, Solomon, but 25. I wasn't writing about this before she published, but my life as a reader really exploded consequent to my reading Harry Potter and trying to explain it, because I had to continue to explore a genre. Schoolboy novels. I've talked about that. I never read about that. Right. Stuff that I had read, C.S. Lewis. I had to do an entirely different reading of Lewis. But when I started, there was no Planet Narnia.
Yes.
And after Planet Narnia comes out, then I had to do a similar treatment with the Ransom novels about alchemy. Right. And all those things were my growth as a reader. Nick has been doing that on steroids the last 5 years. So much so that now I hesitate to recommend a book to Nick because he'll have read it before next time I speak to him. And oh my gosh, now we have to talk about this.
Nick, your level of research is incredible. Not that means much coming from me, but it's staggering.
And I mean, I'm an engineer, and listening to you talk, you also sound like an engineer. I mean, what you produced is a tremendous piece of research. It's scholastically outstanding.
Thank you.
But what you've done that most people who are working in the field of literature don't do is you have explained your method. You have categorized your sources. So you are essentially allowing the next guy to repeat your experiment.
That's the thing.
Now that is remarkably generous, and such a gift to people like John and I, and many of our listeners who do like to theorize and research. Just wonderful. But there's John's mentioned that. You didn't manage to get inside of Fortress Rowling.
I came up to the walls of the fort, and the crossbows shot out of me. Okay, that's the farthest I can say without getting sued. Yeah. So that was a joke. That was a joke. That was a joke.
You're better than most, Solomon, because most of us don't even put our toes in the moat. I mean, it's.
But what we do is we like to play a game. We like to imagine that J.K. Rowling was so entranced by our mammoth Canrecchi celebration of her 60th birthday that we were going to get invited inside Fortress Rowling and allowed to interview her. And what we'd do is we would practice. We would practice what are the questions that we would ask in our game. I always made John come last because I'm fairly sure after the second question we would get ejected from Killer Chassis. But
the
I
game
mean,
I
obviously,
prefer, Nick, is when she's on vibrato serum and we just get to ask the question and she answers.
but you must have thought, because you asked the question, can I interview? So you must have thought, if you were to narrow it down to three questions, what would your three questions be?
I had, well, I'd also love to hear what questions would get you both ejected. I don't have any profound questions about the Harry Potter narrative. I mean, I would, which probably sounds ridiculous, but quite frankly, without, I mean, John's work is, and it's going to sound flattering, okay, if it's taken that way, because some things should be flattered. But John's work is groundbreaking. Without a Christopher Tolkien-like publication of the volumes of manuscripts, there are so many questions I would have. But heck, you would have had him about Lord of the Rings, but you wouldn't have known that Strider was once Trotter and he was a hobbit, and you wouldn't have known any of that. So it's hard to know where even to begin with that. I mean, I would have, okay, three questions would be this. And this is my more emotional, like, nostalgic side coming out. I don't know if this has happened to either one of you, but it happened to me a lot. And maybe it was because I spent a bit of time with Ben, JK's cousin, and that was kind of it was very humanizing to meet with and speak with a Rowling, and someone who actually knew her and knew her mother, and when was talking about Anne, like, oh, that's his aunt, and Pete is his uncle, and all these things. So I felt a great affinity for Anne all through the book. In fact, like I have kind of an aversion to, which might be a flaw in me, I don't know, but I have kind of an aversion to J.K. Rowling was born on July 31st, 1965 as the opening. The first thing I thought, which seemed like low-hanging fruit, was this has to start in an autumn day in 1963 when Anne Volant is going into King's Cross Station. Like, of course that's the right opening. And Anne is the hero of the story. And I know, John, you've talked about how, is this as substantial an influence on Harry Potter as she claims? In terms of who Anne is as a person, though, from what I learned about her, I found what I learned to be, and granted, we know that it's limited, what we know, the extent of what we know, but I found her to be, sweet, delightful, all the different kind of positive adjectives you would use. And when I came to the point where I was writing her death scene right here at this table, I was, devastated. It was late one night, and I was emotional. And the reason I was emotional is because I knew that the next number of years of research in the book, past 1990, Anne was no longer going to be actively in the story. And it seemed like darkness ahead. And then, of course, that's exactly what J.K. said. She said, I felt like I entered a tunnel in 1990, right? and you could feel that. And so I would want to know, if I were sitting with J.K., I would just want to know, even though we already are aware of some facts, like, can you just tell me more about your mother? Little anecdotes about Anne, just tell me about your mother. I would also want to know, and I'm aware that without getting sued, it seems likely that elements of the casual vacancy Simon Price could be taken as scenes out of Church Cottage. Okay, not the scene where he's beating Ruth, and not that, just lay that out there. Okay, fine. But some of the tense exchanges, right? And we know, for people who haven't seen the interview, J.K. said publicly, my house was like a prison. I mean, she called Pete a warden and herself the prisoner. So there's a lot of, when I had people criticize writing about the negative aspects about her relationship with her father, I said, the unfortunate thing is JK opened up about this to some extent publicly multiple times. So I would want to know, as a second question, which again isn't any sort of like specific probing question, if she were willing to share, take me inside Church Cottage. What do you remember? When Robert Caro was writing about Lyndon Johnson, he had a breakthrough moment when he visited Johnson's old home in Texas. And you all might know this story. Robert Caro, the guy who wrote the soon-to-be, hopefully, 5-volume biography of Lyndon Johnson, and after Johnson died, he went to Texas to meet with former friends and neighbors of Johnson and his school teachers, and his brother, Lyndon Johnson's brother, was still alive. And Robert Caro went to Lyndon Johnson's house, which was preserved, and he convinced LBJ's brother to go with him one day. And for a long time, Robert Caro had heard the stories of Lyndon Johnson's childhood and what a hero he was, and all the different positive traits. Like, if you remember, with all due respect to Sean Smith had no idea the negative aspects of the relationship between Pete and JK, to the extent that he suggested Pete was the model for Dumbledore, and that was, it was very early on. But anyway, when Robert Caro took LBJ's brother to their house, where LBJ had grown up and where his brother had grown up with him and where he and his mother and father had sat around the dining room table, Robert Caro had a breakthrough moment one day when the sun was setting, literally right through the dining room table. And he sat LBJ's brother down at the seat where he would have taken. He said, "Okay, David," I think his name was, "David, tell me, LBJ, Lyndon was here, Dad was here, your mother was here. Okay, David, it's time. Tell me what happened here." And there was just silence. And the brother like closed his eyes, and it was just dead quiet in the house. And then all of a sudden he's sitting at the dining room table and he goes something like, "I can hear Lyndon and my dad shouting, I can hear Lyndon saying to Dad, 'What do you know about life? You're a school bus driver.' I can hear Lyndon pounding his fist on the table. I can hear him throwing his chair back and getting up and running." Like, I know we already have some of those scenes potentially from The Casual Vacancy or things she's described. Or she said, the one time she spoke with Pete or one of her parents, presumably Pete, and then she went upstairs and cried. But I would love that. Not love it from the sense of delight in it, but it would be like, take me inside Church Cottage. What was that like? Definitively, like, not here's what we can presume based on this, like, what scenes do you remember? Because who knows too what other aspects of Harry Potter were derived from those kinds of experiences. I know we have yet to find Michael. We've yet to learn what he has to contribute. So that would be number 2. And then number 3 would be this. I'm sure you both are familiar with the German term that C.S. Lewis used, Sehnsucht. Sehncucht, I think it is. And Tolkien talked about this too. I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but they both talked about this idea of longing, right? People who know Lewis's work, he called it joy. He said once that Lewis and he and Tolkien both liked the same work, which were romance literature, and that they defined romance literature as works in which you could hear the horns of elf land calling you to another world. Obviously, that's all over Lord of the Rings. It's all over Chronicles of Narnia. And I was reading the interviews I referenced earlier between Jack Thorne, John Tiffany, and J.K. around Cursed Child, oddly enough. And I don't know if you remember this, but one of the moments that stood out to me, maybe it's because I come from this standpoint personally, I mean, not to get it around to myself, but spiritually, I'm a Christian, and I have found C.S. Lewis's writings about heaven and the afterlife incredibly moving. And even Tolkien's letters, when she writes to his son about heaven, there is a place called heaven where the stories here unwritten are continued and the hopes unfulfilled, where the good here unfinished is continued and the stories yet unwritten and the hopes unfulfilled are completed. That's roughly a quote. Like, all those aspects of Tolkien and Lewis really touched me as I was growing up. And I saw the same thing in Deathly Hallows, right? I mean, I said in the previous interview, I think, that I was just blown away by how profound and emotionally stirring Deathly Hallows was. It was chapters like King's Cross, where Dumbledore says, on. And we know JK in some of her interviews tried to say, well, you can interpret that however you want, but then she came out and said, it's the afterlife, right? Or a limbo state between life and death. It's like, it's so obvious to me that she believes in the afterlife, or she struggled with it. We know all that. And I put that all in the book. But anyway, like, it was there in Harry Potter, this idea of another world, this higher plane of existence, this more noble plane of existence, which is kind of a separate idea. But then to see JK in one interview where she was talking about Jack Thorne, the writer for Cursed Child, and she said, Jack gets it about Harry Potter. It's the idea of another world, a better world, another world. It was like, my gosh, it's the Lewis idea. It's Sainsuit, or however you pronounce it. It's the horns of Elfland, and it's all over Harry Potter too. And so what I would want to know, especially because we know that JK attended church through her teens by herself and through other parts of her life. We know that she kept a painting of Jesus on her wall, etc. We know Beatrice Groves has talked, and John, you've talked at length about the specific details related to the Christian story in Harry Potter, which I tried to get across to Christian friends of mine who don't believe me, and they've become less skeptical when I say your name or Beatrice's name or the Hogwarts professor. What I would want to ask JK is, again, assuming she would be totally open, what moments in your life have you heard the horns of Elfland? Like, was it when you were going through the mountains in Germany with your friend Hannah, or your best friend when you were in your teens, where you got the name Grindelwald from Switzerland, obviously? Or, I mean, I'm not sure she was in Switzerland, but like, was it on one of those crystal clear lakes in Austria that you visited in your teens? Was it by the sea in Bournemouth when you went down to visit Ernie and Kath? What were those moments of joy that Lewis talked about? Because with Lewis's biography, we have them. We have the moments where he sees the little garden when he's 4 years old and he gets that stirring in him, that emotional call to another world. With Tolkien, we have some idea of it. There are moments where he'll talk about, well, I'm forgetting it right now, but I know there are moments in Tolkien's life where I know one, where he was in one of his letters talking about riding his bicycle around Oxford, and he was just gone past the Ackland nursing home for whatever reason, or the Ackland Infirmary, the hospital. And he said, as I was riding my bicycle through the streets and parked outside the hospital, suddenly the entire riddle of the universe came down upon me, and I realized that resurrection, the idea of resurrection, was the key to the questions of the universe, that this idea of life after death, life defeating death, was like a bone snapping back into joint, that the human race, the broken human race, would snap back into joint. And he wrote to his son about that. I would want to know, and maybe we already know some of them, I'm just forgetting them, and they're already in the book and they're just not coming to mind right now. What were those moments where you had, whatever you want to call it, an encounter with the divine, longing for another world, that moment where Harry's outside or in the Forbidden Forest where he sees his parents? Did you see Anne by the shores of the sea in Porto? I'm not trying to sound too mystical, but like, seriously, what were those kinds of moments? So I don't know how good
I can tell you
points are, but
I can tell you that isn't a question I get you thrown out of the room.
No.
I can give you 2 or 3 of those if you want. But
the first one might.
Oh yeah. Well, not the. I don't know. I think she's been open about Anne. It's the second one about her dad that I think might get her tossed, because she's just said, I'm not going to answer any questions that it's not fair to the person who can't respond. And so I'm not sure. Anyway, the third question. You have to remember that scene you mentioned it in Deathly Hallows at King's Cross. Rowling's comments to Lev Grossman and to the Spanish magazine were largely that she wanted to create a debate in readers' minds between, is this real or is this in my head? Is there really an afterlife, or is this simply, Harry having a subconscious experience? Now she's given up that, the answer to that question is largely in the other books where you have ghosts wandering around and things like that. I mean, she's already said largely that souls survive the mortal body.
That there was an on from Phoenix. There's a line where or in one of the Accio quote interviews where J.K. says in Order of the Phoenix, it's not Hermione or Harry, where she says in that book he realized there was an on, and that to me was definitive. It wasn't after that. Anyway, sorry, that just came to mind.
No, but again, she said she wanted there to be a debate in the reader's mind. Sure enough, there was in fandom people that were immunized against any kind of religious faith or spiritual realm, really beyond the psychological, psychism. They didn't want there to be that, and so, but she wanted to push them to have to, have that back and forth with themselves in the text, and it succeeded. In the current book, we're seeing that between how to understand the relationship between Robin and Cormoran as to whether it's a psychological allegory, largely a Jungian, anima and animus, or whether it's a perennialist or Shakespearean allegory of soul and spirit. And there's plenty of evidence, unlike the debate in Harry Potter, that for both sides here. This is more like the division between whether Harry is meant to wind up with Hermione or Ron is meant to wind up with Hermione. There's plenty of evidence for both sides of that thing all through the books.
Right.
But in the current book, you can read this thing Shakespearean style, or you can read it Jungian style, and believe me, there is plenty for you.
And there's maybe even a third strand now where we may be looking at it in a Freudian repression expression as well. But that's very fresh. That's very new.
Yeah. I've ordered this much too expensive book on interpretations of Psyche and Cupid that includes the Freudian interpretation, which I haven't read yet. Anyway,
I think that counts as taking one for the team, John. I'm not going to read that.
John will.
That's my job. Anyway, but to your point about that third question is that Rowling really hasn't testified much more than to a generic Christian faith, and has given some pictures of her history and such, but I don't think she wants that to be part of the conversation so much as she wants the debate to be a real debate. She wants to leave her own view on the matter to be outside the sphere. I mean, she has to have seen what happens, like the debate about whether Snape's a vampire. There's all sorts of evidence in the books that Snape is a vampire.
Right.
But is it a vampire, as in the Bram Stoker sense of vampire, or is it a vampire like the Jungian archetype? I mean, we're definitely of the Jungian archetype thing, but she gives all the playful indications that he's also, the Bram Stoker thing. But there's also the thing that she can't, there's also the possibility that he's a half vampire because his father may have been a vampire. Now that she won't acknowledge that discussion at all. Because
I think she's straight up denied it, hasn't she? She straight up said
denied the vampire.
He's not a vampire. Yeah,
that's right, not a vampire. And okay, that makes sense. He's outside, but he also has oily skin, like he has something over his skin, so he can go outside. But anyway, there's also
he flaps around the dungeon like a bat. Yeah,
like a bat. He turns into a bat at one point. Seriously, I mean, seriously.
It's like
there's also
Tolkien with.
Tolkien with the ferrets. Stuff about. There's so much Bram Stoker stuff about the vampire. But anyway, when Rowling put her foot down on vampire and said he's not a vampire, all of the discussion about the Jungian aspect of vampirism and Snape, which is really important, just was extinguished like a bucket of water on a match. Just poof. Rowling has said that's not it, so you can't have that conversation. And I hope that she learned. Okay, if I want to have the conversation continue. About what my work means, I really can't intervene in this stuff.
Right.
And I want to clarify, going way back to what you said.
Yeah.
In my review of your book, I said, look, I really at one point wanted to just gag on the number of times you said, "Oh, here we go. It's Anne Rowling and how important this book is. Understand this." But I also noted in the review, every doggone time you said that, and I was rolling my eyeballs like, she wasn't dead when the book started. I mean, every single time you had a different Rowling interview saying exactly what you said.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Yeah.
well, what am I supposed to do? You had to look at the evidence. You had the evidence. You'd put it in the supermarket or whatever, and it just kept ka-ching. There it was again. And there it was again. And there it was again. So I get that. I get how important the Anne Rowling thing is, and how much I've really pushed back against that idea, because it doesn't give me the inspiration on the train. But maybe it does. Maybe the experience of her mother's dying on the train is enough. But the mother doesn't die on the train. Mother dying in the cottage has the influence on the train.
Right.
I'm skeptical. I think there's got to be something to do with the relationship with, Michael. But that
Solomon.
Oh, I have to ask you guys a question while I'm here with you, because it's something I've been curious about, and you are the gentleman to ask. So I have not. Well, the answer I have is not a good one. So you probably know, you definitely know. When I lead tours through Scotland themed around J.K. and Harry Potter, we make the obligatory stop in Greyfriars Kirkyard in Edinburgh, where people are delighted to see Tom Riddle, the name, McGonagall, Sirius Black. In fact, when we were there in 23, you might know, the stone was gone, and the security guy said, "Oh, some bloke came in here and crowbarred it off." And what I was thinking, we grew up, my siblings and I, watching I Love Lucy, the Lucille Ball 1950s sitcom. There's an episode where Lucille Ball and Vivian Vance, who played Ethel Mertz, they take a crowbar and steal John Wayne's footprints from Grauman's Chinese Theater. I mean, some Harry Potter fan came and crowbarred Sirius Black's gravestone off the wall in Edinburgh. There's so many names. We know she was working at the Elephant House. She's admitted to that. And even Nicholson's in Edinburgh. If she's pushing Jessica around, it's a 5-minute walk. And but she came out and blatantly denied that she had visited. This is, I think, what she said, and I hope I'm not misquoting it. "I didn't visit that part of Edinburgh." Was it before I published the book, or however she worded it? Now, to me, I have two instances I can point to where I know definitively, with all due respect to her, and I pointed this out in the book, that J.K. Rowling, I don't want to say lied, that sounds really harsh, deceived the public, misled the public. Two. Number one, 1999, National Press Club, summer or fall, a couple months before Jorge Arantes' first interview went down. She said in front of that crowd that only her and her sister had known about Harry Potter prior to the book being published. She knew that Arantes knew, and she didn't say that publicly. And I understand why, right? He broke in. She was worried for the safety of herself, her daughter, all that. I give her whatever legitimate reason she had. Totally fair. But nevertheless, noted. And number two is, and again, maybe I just misheard this, but in the 2011 interview with James Runcie, 12, after The Casual Vacancy was published, she said that me and my sister were the only members of our family in our generation, in our age category. Unless I'm mistaken, that's just outright telling the public that Ben and Brian E. Rowling didn't even exist. Again, I don't know why. It boggles my mind. So I don't even remember where I was going with this. Oh, Greyfriars Kirkyard. Does that, in your gentleman's estimation, is there some really good reason why she would deny the Greyfriars Kirkyard connection? Did she misremember? What? Because I've had people on my tours ask me. They say, "Solomon, what the heck?" And I don't want to come out and say she lied. I don't know, but what do you two make of that?
So I think Rowling is not a big fan of the tours, and John will know my natural instinct is to is to justify J.K. Rowling's wrongdoing. I think she certainly made that statement with an aim to mislead. I wouldn't go so far as to say it was a lie.
Sure.
I think it was stretching credibility and truth to breaking point.
Sure.
J.K. Rowling grew up in a graveyard.
Mm.
This is her home. I mean, Church Cottage is in a graveyard. You know,
Right.
that's
Right.
if she wanted to get out of the house and it was raining, there's the church next door, and it's the only building really within quick walking distance if she wanted to get out of the house. Her playground would have been among tombstones. This is her natural habitat.
It's a great point.
I know eminent people in the fandom that I shall not name, who agree that yes, she is certainly familiar with that, with the Greyfriars. She's the what she saw there, even if not consciously, absolutely impacted the work. Maybe not all of it consciously. So maybe that's how she justified herself. Yes, I go there. I don't want the tours there because then I can't go there anymore. And anyway, I only got a couple of names consciously from that area, or maybe consciously I didn't get any of the names there, but she spent enough time there that we know, for example, that Severus, and she's admitted that it came to her where the name Severus came from. And it was during COVID, during lockdown, she was following her old haunt in London from where she lived to the tube station to where she worked. And she must have been following on Google Street View because she saw Severus Road as a street name.
Right.
And she went, that's where I got his name from. Now, that wasn't conscious. And probably if somebody had asked her, outside of her discovering it from herself, did you get it from that street in South London? No, absolutely not. Don't know where that is.
Right.
So
okay, I mean, Nick, I defer to you on all these lake questions, and also your sobriety. God bless you. I'm definitely much more than Norman than an American than Nick will ever be. But there are some things where Rowling just, the whole Robert Galbraith thing, and her squeezing people like Ian Rankin to cover for her when she was quite clearly lying about the fact that she was writing a detective series. And there are just moments where she has lied flat out. Now, she has reasons for it, and these were not lies that necessarily hurt anyone, but it means that as a biographer, you're dealing with an undependable narrator. And for example, some of the stuff that just jumps out at me is the Hogwarts thing, where she claims it's from Flower, that she went to this botanical museum with her sister, and there was a lily or something called the Hogwarts lily. Well, that's just a lie. I mean, she has to know it's not true because we know that she's read Molesworth. She quotes Molesworth in her piece that she wrote for the University of Exeter Alumni Magazine. And this Molesworth is clearly the type of public school that she satirized. I mean, she's taking straight from Molesworth in the Hogwarts play on schoolboy novels. And inside Molesworth, Hogwarts is the name of an opposing school.
Wow. Yeah.
So it's like, come on, Joe, please, don't,
Sure.
Now, maybe she forgot that. Maybe and then her sister reminded her about this flower. But again, it's kind of like the quotation from Plutarch at the Harvard thing, which is just comic. I went in search of this Plutarch thing, which didn't sound like Plutarch to me. And I'm a classicist, and I was like, that doesn't sound like Plutarch. And so I was just searching around for it, and I put the quote in and put Plutarch, and up came this quotation website where there's a site that just lists all of these pithy comments. It's sort of like a poor man's Bartlett's. And And there was this website in which that quotation, which is from Otto Rank, a Freudian psychologist of the 30s and 40s, there was that quotation, but it was underneath another quotation from Plutarch, and she read Plutarch and the quotation and ascribed it to Plutarch. It's not Plutarch, it's Otto Rank. And yet she pulled that off on one of the world's most prestigious stages.
Right.
And she got basically, she was quoting from a quotation website rather than something that was carved in stone over an archway at the University of Exeter.
But I don't think anyone else in the world spotted that apart from you, John. Which says something about classics at Harvard, doesn't it?
That's not nice, Nick.
No. It is true that Harvard's graduation exercise includes an oration by the top-ranking graduate in the classics department who gives an oration in Latin, Ciceronian Latin, not medieval Latin, and that they're seriously, classics at Harvard, is serious business, and there she is. Right. I think there may have been quite a few people in Harvard Yard that rolled their eyeballs at that quotation from Plutarch. Like, if me, really quite a pedestrian classicist, with 30 years history between me and real study, picked that up, there are other people that just went, So, yeah, Rowling as the authority on her own life, certainly, you certainly value her memories and her associations and all those things. But there are other things that, for example, she didn't leave England for Porto after the death of her mother. She doesn't leave for 11 months after the death of her mother. She leaves almost immediately after her breakup with Michael.
Right.
And we know that she was having problems with Michael when she has the inspiration for Harry Potter. Well, that means that you want to know more about Michael. Is she ever going to tell us about Michael? No, that would be a horrific offense against Michael, because Michael's kept this private for 30 plus years.
Right.
And his wife, and you assume his children's lives will be exploded if he becomes known as the man that, who broke up with one of the world's most important and influential women. I mean, his life, his children's life, et cetera, it just is forever colored by that.
Right.
We know that what the first paragraph of his Wikipedia page will be, most noted for having, been the dupe that threw away a chance to marry Harry Potter's author, J.K. Rowling. And so she's not going to talk about that. Right. And, bless her for that. I mean, that's,
sure.
that's for the guy, 30 years from after Rowling is dead to write. Like the way that Tolkien biographers can write now about all of Tolkien's children and all of Tolkien's, the almost mystical relationship with his wife, that all those things can be discussed now. And, that's history.
The difficult
you're
thing,
writing the book. You have written the book. It is published. It is available now. Please follow the link below and buy it.
Thank you.
You have put together all the available information online, and you have found other things. I mean, you've talked to the Rowling cousins. You've talked to, you talked to Orontes. You found some people that I didn't think you'd be able to find, and you got information from them. And that's going to be really the foundation on which future revelations, that will be Rowling's critical biography that she authorizes and she opens the gates, or that we get post-mortem, which I assume will be more the case when people like Jessica talk about what life was like at Shea Rowling, or Neil talks about. I mean, there's so many things that we want to know that, frankly, I don't expect to see. In my lifetime.
May she live, by the way, may she live long and happily. And yes, if that exposes, well, I don't.
Now that you've called her a liar, now that you've done all these things, oh yeah. I guess in the blacklisted community, so
we have the transcript, John. That was you.
Hey, what can I ask? What I'm sure there's many. What primary questions would both of you ask that you think would get you kicked out? Are you
Oh,
willing to
no,
share?
no, no. We're not
Oh, I
going
wouldn't.
there.
No, okay.
I wouldn't ask those questions. I mean, I would. Uh, my first question would be similar to one of yours. Actually, I would want to know. I would want to take it outside of Church Cottage because I think asking about inside Church Cottage would get me kicked out. So I want to know outside Church Cottage. I would want to know what a young girl from her early teens, what would she do? What was her friendship group like?
Mm,
What was her relationship with the church as a building? Did she walk along the banks of the Wye? Did
mm,
she walk into Chepstow? Um, was she conscious of the huge manor house that's almost right next door to Church Cottage?
mm.
Did she know the family? I would want to know. Here's one question I'd love to ask her. I would pitch. I'm creating a new dating site, and it's going to sweep the world. And what you do is you input into this dating site 3 books that your life partner should have read and reread and understood to know me as a person. To appreciate me, you have to know these 3 books.
Right.
I would want to know what her 3 books were.
Yeah, Nick, and all 25 people in the world that, are single and, have that thing. This is not going to be the most popular dating site in the world. I shouldn't say that because the hundreds of people, not quite thousands, but I mean, the hundreds of people that follow us globally. I mean, Nick, I just looked at this last weekend. Hogwarts Professor is now in 49 states.
Yeah.
We have a holdout in North Dakota. Solomon, if you have a friend in North Dakota, please tell them to subscribe. And we're in 45 countries.
Yeah.
Which it's pretty much a global thing.
Terrific.
And that audience is almost entirely our audience. Hi out there, audience. That audience is almost entirely the people you're talking about that are serious rereaders. I mean, C.S. Lewis talked about readers and serious readers. Some readers are people that read stuff on the signs, maybe on their phone, and they read it once and they scroll and it's done. And rereaders are people that revisit texts repeatedly to get at, to do the slow mining that Ruskin says you have to do to really understand a painting or a book. And that is our audience. In a world where reading is as largely eclipsed as a skill and an art, our audience is that group of people, that male and female and globally, that wants to understand how to read more and better and more profoundly and understand really what the art of reading is. And that's what we do. Now, that includes, contra what many people make of Lewis's personal heresy argument, certainly the one I made. Right. Lewis, in the personal heresy, says, don't try to get into the author's head. But at the same time, Lewis said in all of his books where he introduces literature, from Fairy Queen to Milton and stuff, he wants you to have the mind of the people of the era in which they lived.
Right.
And so that's largely the lake work that we're doing, is letting you understand how Rowling, as a person of her age, is writing these works. Now, where am I going with all this? What we do here is help people understand the depths of Rowling's artistry and meaning. And that's a peculiar bunch. Those people are an audience for your biography, in the sense that they need to understand Rowling's being a typical person of her age and being an atypical person of her age. That how the core traumas and difficulties of her life moved her to take those events, the lake material, move them into her shed, where she uses very, very traditional tools to craft archetypal literature to challenge them, to really to transform them. That's what we do, and your work is an important part of that now. I mean, is that it's a foundational piece that people that want to understand that better can do. Now, the questions I would ask, to get back to what you're thinking, is and I can ask and expect to stay in the room, are the bookshelf questions.
Right.
You know, I'm not going to ask her about the Manor House. That's fascinating, Nick. You know, I find that topic fascinating. I might even ask her a class question. Really, you know, what class? Even though you're now of the you know, the tabloids say you're a billionaire, but you're of the elite financial status. But what class do you understand yourself to be a member of? Because from my conversations with Nick, you know, the answer is quite clear that she's lower middle class, and that she prides herself on that. You know, when she says about Jack Thorne and company, we're all comprehensive trained, she's saying, hey, you know, she wears that like a ribbon, you know, like a badge. It's just like, hey, we're not part of those people.
Right.
Watch her make a cup of tea, John. That's the key.
Believe me, Nick, I'm gonna film it. If I ever get a solo thing, I'm gonna be like, where does she put her spoon? When does the milk go in? You know, my God. All right, those are Nick questions. I'm fascinated by those things.
Yeah.
But I want to go to the bookshelf and say, okay, you said you read a boatload of books on alchemy. Give me 3 names. Give me 3 titles. And we've got a lot of your A-level courses for reading, but really, what were they? Give me all of them. Give me what you read and what you made of it. What were the supplementary texts you read about those things?
We've come so far. We just need to know what examination board she sat, and we can get the papers. We can get her syllabus. Yeah.
That's my question. Frankly, because I want B. Groves to be able to die in peace. That's really is my hope. You know, that this will be. I can see B doing. Oh my goodness, we have the A-level syllabus. You know, like that. And those questions, you know, the alchemy questions, the A-levels question, and then it's it's structure. It's about, you know, was it Lucy Shepard that taught you about ring composition? Or where else did you get that? You get that from myth, you know. And finally, you know, have you read Martin Ling's? If I'd ask about one author, it would be, have you read Martin Ling's on Shakespeare? Because so much of what she does in her books is about, all the tools that she uses are about sacred art and literature. You know, that literature done rightly is a non-liturgical sacred art. And the only people that write about that are the perennialists. And I want to know if she's read that. I'm pretty sure she's read Titus Burckhardt, a perennialist on alchemy. But I don't know whether she's read Martin Ling's on Shakespeare. And there's been, as far as I know, Nick, that's not on any of the bookshelf backgrounds we've seen in any of her pictures.
No, we've looked for it.
So those would be my questions. I would go for artistry and meaning. And then after Nick asked his questions about the Manor House, then I would ask the probing personal questions that would get me, you know, the button would be pushed and the floor would open and I go down to the elevator. So that's that. Those questions will be answered in the future. And I will continue probably to lose friends and supporters that think my interest in those subjects are not prurient, or you know, that you know, I can live with. I want your grandson Solomon, who picks up your mantle and to write the definitive critical literature biography, to say, you know, John Granger was asking about this. Well, you know, this was known at the time. My grandfather communicated with John Granger, and John Granger said, "Find Michael." You know, that's.
Hey, I will say,
then again, if you find Michael, I hope that you have the good sense not to expose him.
Well, I would say the somewhat depressing prediction I've made to myself, or maybe not prediction, but the somewhat depressing thought I've had is when it comes to J.R.R. Tolkien, I had thought of doing a biography of him, synthesizing all the information we have, including the expanded letters, because Humphrey Carpenter's biography, which came out in 1977, does give a lot of background details and information about the family and his creative process. But there's been a lot of work on Tolkien done since. The major issue, of course, is besides Tom Shippey, who knew him briefly, virtually everyone who knew J.R.R. Tolkien is dead, including all the people who knew him well. What memoirs they've written are limited in scope. We have essays from a couple of his kids, but Priscilla, Christopher, Michael, and John are all gone, his kids. And they didn't leave much in the way of memories besides a book called The Tolkien Family Album, which, again, wasn't overly revelatory, had pretty standard biographical details. And I'm conscious of the fact that when we see in Tolkien's letters those ellipses, unless Bailey is Tolkien's daughter-in-law, decides to open the floodgates, or Simon, his grandson, which may or may not happen. I don't know. For as long as this continues as it is, those ellipses in his letters where it skips over parts that are relevant, we're never going to get access to that unless someone in the family cracks. And that's their right. But even with JK, I mean, it's to a whole different level. We don't have, right? Not that she was of the age of letter writing like Tolkien and Lewis, but we have scraps of letters, which is better than nothing. We have nowhere near close to anything like the manuscripts we would want. And it's possible, right, given her proclivities, that she's going to ensure they stay that way for a long time. So I don't mean to be depressed. I'm happy with what has been able to be uncovered so far to an extent, but I sense it will be more like Tolkien than Lewis. I mean, we know everything about Lewis's private life, virtually. We know every single sexual sin he struggled with from the time he was a little kid. I mean, we know everything. We know every letter he wrote and published thanks to Walter Hooper. We know his diary. We know everything about him, but not Tolkien, and certainly not, as you know, J.K. And I suspect, like Tolkien, it will stay that way. I don't know. And you say rightly, John, it could be my grandson, right? But
I think the difference is it's beyond imagining that Professor Tolkien would, in answer to the question, how do you come up with your ideas, would answer the question with anything as enlightening as The Lake in the Shed. And that's not to say that I think he was any less introspective or self-analytical. Right. I think that would just be too personal, too private for him to answer. Now Rowling's already done that several times now.
Right.
So she is interested in answering that question to a point.
Right.
The question is she going to be interested in developing that to explain, precisely where that subconscious comes from? Maybe she will. She's been very open in her interest in psychology, both directly and obliquely, with using Jungian texts and hints going in a Jungian direction. Maybe she will.
These three questions, it's fascinating.
Yeah.
Discussion. I can see why this perennially occupies you both.
Yeah.
I was thinking through the questions I would have, and those are the ones I would come at with, and obviously others. So we'll see. Who knows? I doubt it will ever happen. I have people who say to me, and probably people who said to you, "Oh, you never know. You might meet her." And I think, nope, I don't think so. I met Neil Blair, but that was. But she's even less likely to be in public than he is. So as crazy as that is.
I'm gonna shift gears here.
Okay.
Nick and I have been this is been you interviewing me and Nick. This is not what we're here for.
Hey, by the way, I'm going to turn on these lights.
Rowling has said repeatedly through the years that the critical negative events of her life that reshaped her thinking and her work were the death of her mother and the abusive relationship she had with her first husband.
Right.
I think you agree with that. But what do you think were the most important positive turns in her life?
I had written down some thoughts before we met, and I would say basically what I echoed, or what I mentioned earlier, I would echo again here. That quote she gave to Jack Thorne about Jack Thorne gets it, this idea of another world. And the fact that she was attending church from the time she was very young, through her formative years, and through other vulnerable stages of her life, her late 20s in Edinburgh, more or less. And as far as we know, through parts of her 30s, 40s, and potentially up to present day, too. The people at St. Columba's in Edinburgh told me she's still a member of the church there. I don't know how often she attends. But so those two, the quote from J.K. about another world and what we discussed earlier, which was Dumbledore saying on, and that sane-souped call that Lewis talked about, which I see in Rowling's work, and I felt it. So maybe that's just a subjective conclusion, but I don't think so, especially because of her thought of another world. Whether that means another world, i.e. heaven, a place I'm going on to after this life, or a higher plane of existence. Like, one of the things I've tried to explain to people who haven't read Harry Potter about the moral value in the stories is, and you'll hear this all the time, right? It teaches you about friendship and loyalty and bravery and courage and all this. And one of the things I've considered is what that's basically saying is that there is a higher, nobler plane of existence to be achieved, without trying to sound too much like Jordan Peterson, whom I like. This idea that there's a higher way of living, a higher calling, a more noble existence, which is open to us, which is that the human race is made, as the Bible says, ultimately for perfection. Jesus says, be ye perfect as your Father in heaven is perfect. That through, as the Christian religion teaches it, through God's grace, we could achieve this higher, nobler existence. In other words, another world, a better world, a better existence. So whether she's talking about heaven or this idea of a better, higher, nobler plane of existence or something else, it seems obvious to me that when she was sitting in that pew in St. Luke's as a little girl and seeing the stained glass window of Jesus, and it says that those who die in the Lord shall be resurrected, or whatever exactly the Bible verse said, that when she gazed transfixed at the picture of Jesus on the wall of the National Gallery in London, that wasn't just her admiration for paintings, that she was transfixed by this figure. I believe that there are spiritual encounters she's had, or whether you want to call them encounters with the divine, encounters with spiritual elements to the world that have motivated her creation of Harry Potter to a large extent. And can't read inside someone's head, but that's kind of what I'm doing by answering this question. So that, me wanting to know earlier what those specific moments of spiritual encounter were, we have glimmers of them. And I probably speak somewhat narcissistically here and autobiographically here because I've experienced that in my little life. And I see evidences of it in JK. And of course, the fact that, and I guess this is basically touching on the wider issue, which is JK's being impacted by the Christian religion, which, John, you covered at length and in depth. And one of the points I tried to get across in a talk I gave on JK and the Christian elements of Harry Potter, if you will, a couple months ago to fellow Christians who hadn't considered that. And I gave a fairly I won't say surface level. I'm not trying to insult anyone there, but in terms of my depths of analysis, it's nothing like yours or Beatrice Grove's. But it isn't lost on me that as pessimistic as J.K. is about the world, she says life. She told James Runcie she sees life as a comic tragedy. As pessimistic as she is about the world, Harry Potter doesn't end with the word scar as she originally plans. It ends with the word all was well. It ends on an optimistic tone. And I know people can debate whether it had more of a Grey Havens tone to it. As I read it, it has very positive tone. It's good wins, and it's the most cliched thing you've ever heard. But the critical thing to me is that's, and we know this is taught in other religions, but that's what the Christian religion teaches. If there's one overriding element of the Christian faith which sticks out to me, it's this idea of life conquering death. And that sounds so cliched, obviously, but it's also what J.K. has pointed to many times in her own personal encounters. Please.
I'm going to interrupt here.
Hope over despair.
Let me interrupt. My question was, what are the positive events in her life that you think are the most important? And you're speculating about events that you want to know more about. And guess what? I've never written about those events because we don't know about those events. I've written about the Christian elements in her work, but I don't know anything about her Christian journey. Really spit about that because she hasn't shared that. And none of her friends have shared that.
Right.
So what events that we know about for sure? I mean, I'm going to give you, I'm going to throw out three, and you can say which one of these three you think is the most important. All right.
Please.
Her marriage to Neil Murray, her going for psychological counseling that we know about for certain with a CBT analyst or someone proficient in that psychotechnology. We assume that she's had other counseling as well, but we don't know that for sure. But that she's had some psychological counseling and some study there. And three, just her study of mythology, her the intellectual influences that she got from her comprehensive and the University of Exeter. Now those are three positive events in her life, I think. And Nick, you have other ones, Nick, in your mind? I want to give Solomon a full smorgasbord here, so he can say, okay, that I think is.
I mean, if you're going to look for a positive event in her life, it's walking into the Waterstones in Edinburgh and seeing Philosopher's Stone in print. It's going to be the birth of her daughter Jessica and Kenzie and David.
Right.
It's going to be. I'm not going to say the marriage to Neil Murray. I'm going to say the meeting of Neil Murray.
What's the distinction? I
don't think the marriage as an event was as epoch making in her life.
Now you mean the wedding?
Yeah.
I meant the marriage.
Oh yeah. I get you. Yeah. The relationship. I think the relationship was. Yeah.
Well, and in terms of, if we just talk about straight positive events in her life, but that also had an impact on her work. By the way, to finish my point about the Christian thing, I'll just wrap up with this. We know certain snapshots we get of her attending St. Luke's, her seeing the painting at the Supper Emmaus, that I extrapolate without, as John pointed out, somewhat on stilts as encounters with the divine, whatever you want to call them. It seems to me those are absolutely there. We might not be able to grasp them fully yet. So lay that aside. Positive encounter, positive situations to me would be the encounters with the teenagers and orphans she met through Lumos in Eastern Europe. She was writing Half-Blood Prince, right, which has Voldemort in an institution while meeting kids who were in institutions and hadn't dealt with love and hadn't encountered love. So I would go to that. But obviously the main positives I would see, and this is my anophilism coming out, and anophilism coming out would be the encounters, but that's already taken. So yeah, I would say the encounters with those children come to mind as situations that appear to be extremely positive impacts on her. There are a lot. You know what I'm going to say? I'm going to have to go look through some reference texts to refresh my memory. But yeah, that one comes to mind while she was writing Harry Potter.
Well, that's interesting.
And Sean Harris, the relationship with Sean Harris, it's clear she was absolutely over the moon about Sean.
And still is. Yeah.
Right.
I seriously, maybe her relationship with Sean Harris is the model for the Strellicott romance.
Right.
It's interesting. You mentioned the Lumos children.
Yes.
And that isn't so much a positive event as it is an achievement. And like Nick, the publication of her first book is maybe even the birth of her children. Those aren't so much positive events as things that she accomplished. That were so rewarding to her, like, oh, my life has a new dimension now due to this thing that I've chosen to do.
Right.
And I wonder if I think you're right, but all of you, the children, the publication, the Lumos children, but I wonder if now it doesn't include the letters that she gets from families that include people that are struggling with so-called transgenderism, and thanking her for her basically throwing herself against this riptide of madness and in the last 25 to 30 years. The gratitude for people that are detransitioning and stuff like that. I mean, that's all off screen, but she's alluded to it several times. She says, if only you could read the letters that I received.
Right.
I think that doesn't yet have the benefit of hindsight. So this is still a developing part of her life, and it's a big part of her life, and it's been developing now for it's 5-6 years, but it's still happening. So I don't know whether she has had time to reflect on that yet. Is that, in terms of her life, is that an overall positive or an overall negative? It's certainly huge. And it's going to be one or the other in reflection.
What I'm remembering is she said one of the letters from the detransitioners made her go face down on her kitchen table and start crying. And there was another instance where she read a essay published by parents of a girl named Cassie, I think was the name given to her, in the summer of 2022, a disabled young girl who had a transgender caretaker, and there were accusations of the disabled young girl being raped, sexually assaulted, I believe. And JK read that and said, I'm so angry, my hands are bloody, shaking as I type this. I see a lot of anger, which sounds super patronizing. I don't mean it that way, but the woomed outburst was, she said, anger. I snapped. And to me, seeing what did she say to James Runcie in 2007? What's your greatest weakness? Short fuse. It's there. I mean, it's right there. She admitted to it. So that, to me, when I saw that initially, was okay. We're going to see instances of this, and of course you do. And I think I wrote right in the book something like the thing that most logically came to my mind to say was, and Joe snapped, and Rowling snapped. And by that point in the book, I thought it would be familiar to readers. The other thing I would mention, which is not obviously positive, but one of the accounts I was amazed to come across, which you've seen, is the little girl Katie, who sadly had cancer and died when she was, I think, 8, very young. And the letters that J.K. wrote to her parents were absolutely beautiful and emotionally insightful. In those letters, of course, Rowling made reference to the afterlife, which was very interesting to my perspective. But she talked about how the encounters with Katie had touched her. Now, is that one of many encounters she's had? Seems like it. But I'm trying to think of the evidence that would have stood out to her. Maybe it just stood out to me personally because it was so interesting to see this very personal side of Rowling in her letters to these parents, and to get this mental image of her reading parts of the unfinished manuscript of Goblet, which she so carefully guarded from anyone else, to Katie as Katie was passing away. Maybe that was just impactful to me, but it was clear again that J.K. was sobbing as she wrote that. So not so positive from the standpoint of like, it's a little girl who died, not positive at all.
No.
But positive from the standpoint of an encounter with love, an encounter with an encounter where J.K. got to pour out a very beautiful kind of love from herself to a very worthy, deserving, innocent object. So if you talk about love as positive encounters in Rowling's life, there is a very clear encounter with unvarnished, beautiful, innocent, childlike, pure love. And people who hate J.K. won't like me saying that, but that's what I read in that instance.
But I think we have evidence that this happens more than we know.
Right.
You know, we sort of occasionally will get a glimpse, something will come into the public domain. We know she had a similar letter writing relationship with Ivana Lynch, who played Luna Lovegood, who was suffering from eating disorders and mental disorders, social anxiety. She had a relationship with a young girl that was self-harming. And that's just the things that have filtered through to us in the public domain. I think this is just the kind of person that J.K. Rowling is.
Yes. Well, the other positive encounters that come to my mind, and I got to be careful with this one because I can't give the reference where she says this was a positive encounter that changed my life. I'll throw out one though for a hypothetical, which is the 2011 premiere of Deathly Hallows Part 2. Even though she hates the attention on herself and had to sign endless books, and it's clear that was a summit moment of her life. And she said in an interview that she didn't want to publish her next Potter book or her next book post Potter until after the movies came out, and that premiere was obviously the close of that chapter of her life. And when she was in Trafalgar Square, where 20 years previously she had been standing at a New Year's party as a 25-year-old, dancing around to music and butting into people's armpits, as she herself said, and all that stuff, to fast forward 21 years later and see herself in Trafalgar Square with the crowds chanting JK, JK, and to see the eyes of the entire world focused in on her, to see them crying, and Emma Watson crying, and to give that line, Hogwarts will always be there to welcome you home. Whether or not we have endless amounts of evidence to showcase that, if not positive, a positive encounter, perhaps a breakthrough encounter, a closing encounter, whatever you would call it, obviously a summit moment. And of course, the irony, sadly, and I realized this with disappointment as I was writing the book, was like, that would have been a great place to end the biography, right? And then you go, oh, right. There's post 2011. Right. So again, all I could think to write was, who would have thought that the harmony displayed here would be ruptured or fractured or whatever I said? Because there's Emma Watson crying and embracing her. There's Daniel Radcliffe and Rupert Grint and all the people who would later come out and distance themselves. Rupert Grint, not as much, but like it just, I thought, man, there's the logical end. But then, of course, the logical end came to me later when I heard Bill Maher's quote after the Supreme Court in the UK made the ruling in April 25. And it was like, okay, whether people hate or love JK, here's the ending. And and of course, and the concert in London from 25, where thousands of British young people were chanting, F you and F to misogyny and F to this, and then the person leading the concert says, and what do we think of J.K. Rowling? F you! And it's like, as the loudest response was to J.K.'s name. And you think, wow, what a switch from being the hero of the millennial audience to being the oppressor of the Gen Z audience. What a switch. What a 180, right? I mean, it's staggering.
As
But that's
and
not a positive, obviously.
no, but it is part of what makes your biography just such an enthralling read. It is just such a great story arc.
Mm.
And I find myself in the position now, a little bit like where I finish a Robert Galbraith book. I have a week or two where I am a satisfied reader. And of course, we have these wonderful conversations talking about it. And then after about 2 weeks, I'm already into, okay, JK, what's next? Where's the next book? Come on, Joe, what are you doing? So I have to throw the same question to you, Solomon.
Yes.
I've finished your book. I've loved it. I've
Thank
had
you.
my 2 weeks of satisfaction, and I'm already hungry for the next book. What do you have planned next?
I appreciate the question. Well, over time, this will be a long project, but I've been contracted to write a biography on a man no one's ever heard of named Donald John Trump. And now I can already hear the protests because I've already gotten them. There's been endless books written about Donald Trump. What are you going to say that hasn't been said? And so on. All I would say is this: if you go into Barnes and Noble, every single book, bar none, about Donald Trump comes from a definitively partisan spin. I grew up reading biographies like George Weigel's biography of John Paul II. No, I'm not comparing Donald Trump to John Paul II. I grew up reading David McCullough, John Adams. No, I'm not comparing Donald Trump to John Adams. My point is, I've read what I would describe as objective biographies, and by that I mean where the author does make a conscious attempt to distance themselves from the subject and write the chronological narrative of this person's life in hopefully an interesting way. And that's what I intend to do with Donald Trump, for better or worse, the 45th and 47th president, to give a chronological account of his life in hopefully an interesting narrative that doesn't say love or hate this man. And I had a friend of mine say, would you write an objective biography of Adolf Hitler? And obviously, out of respect to my Jewish friends, I'm not going to callously come out and say yes to that question. But in a certain sense, too, it's like, well, as far as I understand it, and this is what I believe, the way, now we can debate whether or not it in practical theory actually does, but the way you collect, interpret, and report on what you describe as historic fact, or as close as you can come to historic fact, isn't supposed to change whether or not you find the person morally reprehensible. Now, we can debate whether that actually works in practical reality, but that's what I intend to do with Donald Trump. I have, not to name drop, I've interviewed him once in the past. I've interviewed a number of people in his world, and I think it's important to get even more of the people who are still alive, their testimony down while they're alive, to get that perspective. I think there's a lot of Donald Trump's life that, well, there is a lot I'm interested to explore more, the relationship between him and his mother, whatever there is to be learned there, and with Fred and so on, Fred and Mary Trump. So yeah, but obviously years-long project. It's already been years in the making, and I anticipate that taking me a long time. But my ultimate hope is to teach American political history at the university level. And while JK isn't explicitly American political history, she has touched American politics. My gosh, hasn't she? So it does fit into there on some level, and certainly my book on Dershowitz did. So those are my plans. As my Jewish friends say, man plans, God laughs. So that's what I would say.
I mean, as a raging communist, I doubt anyone can be truly impartial. But having read your treatment of J.K. Rowling, I don't think I would be interested in reading anybody else's biography of Donald Trump. But I certainly will be queuing up to read your treatment.
Thank you.
I think what Nick is referring to there is that you have very strong opinions about issues that are reflected in Rowling's life, but in your in A Pen to Change the World, you very I say very objectively, you worked diligently to maintain an objective posture towards that. that these were the responses. This is what Rowling said and did, and these were some of the responses to that. And you left it very much to the reader to say, okay, were those people nut jobs for having that response?
Right.
Or were they, responding to this, with legitimate concerns?
Right.
But without that information, without both those things, the reader would be left to find those things out on their own, which is
Sure.
the reason they're reading your book, is to get that information so they can make that judgment.
Sure.
I do think by writing a biography of President Trump, that you have, if you weren't already secured against ever writing the authorized biography of J.K. Rowling, you have done it. You have done the deed that will immunize you forever from having contact with J.K. Rowling.
Do you know, I think if there were enough reviews out there praising its neutrality, I think that would be a book that would. We know she likes biographies. I think Trump is an enigma to her. If only, how can this man be so awful? And I have some sympathy with that opinion, which is why I would be interested to read this, because again with J.K. Rowling, I recognize my prejudices.
Sure.
If I wrote a biography, it would be a hagiography.
Sure.
So reading it in such a neutral style, where honestly I wanted to pick holes in that biography.
Sure.
And you gave me no opportunity to do that. I think that kind of treatment on President Trump, I think that would appeal to her. Certainly it appeals to you.
This I mean, for example, you mentioned all the members of Trump's family, but you didn't mention his older brother and his death. And when I meet people, Trump critics and fanatics, because raging communists are some of my best friends, but they don't know about Trump's family history as a rule, and Trump's relationship with his older brother, in a way, frames his entire life.
Right.
And yet, you may see it in Trump biographies, but even in daily coverage about the fact that he doesn't drink.
Right.
Which he may be the first American president in history, I think, that was abstemious from that. There are certainly depths to the buffoon from Queens, as he's commonly understood, that his prominence and his effect. He gave a talk on Thursday night, which was mind-blowing and totally ignored by the president. And Nick, I don't know if you know this, but usually the rule in the United States is that the presidential address will be covered on all the networks. And two of the principal networks decided they weren't going to show Trump's address. And it's just like there's the Civil War in the United States is ongoing. All right,
John,
enough about that.
We're dangerously crossing our no politics rule. John and I have fascinating political discussions, but usually off camera.
Yes. Well, and I think this.
I'm only saying what Nick said is that I look forward to having read your Rowling biography and knowing a lot about Rowling biography, and I made my complaints about it, and I acknowledged really the foundational synthetic work that you've done here. I look forward to the same kind of treatment to whatever subject you choose,
Thank you.
because we need more of it.
I again, at risk of flattery, I'll keep this brief, but I'll say it was a delight to learn from you both, and I hope that will continue for a long time. And you both have changed the way I understand J.K. and Harry Potter. I think for the better, for greater accuracy and greater emotional and intellectual depth. And I'm glad that many have also benefited from that. And I'm looking forward to learning more, because there's a lot more to learn. And I appreciate you both as people, as gracious, kind people, and highly intelligent people. So I guess it's probably the Italian in me, but I'm very open about my positive emotions. So that's, yeah, I say that to you both. And what more can I say except, as much as people hate JK, my gosh, Harry Potter is such a beautiful series and or story. You know, Brian Sibley, who's a Tolkien scholar, they were interviewing him about Lord of the Rings in the behind the scenes of the movies. And they were trying to get to the question, why do people like Lord of the Rings? Why do people like Lord of the Rings? And he gave an answer which to me just sums it up beautifully. And he said, and my mother will slap me later for saying this, but he said, it's a damn good story. That's it. That's it. Goodbye. Go home. Class dismissed. So,
Nick, I want to make it a condition for all future interviews with people on our show that they say,
Yes.
you know, things like that Solomon has said here about just how brilliant and kind and generous we are.
I've made a note. I think for some of our guests, we'll have to script that for them, but that's fine.
Yes. No, that's how I landed this interview, folks. Yes. How did you talk with John and Nick? Hey, so thank you to both. Thank you for your critical reviews from the standpoint of thoughtful reviews. And it's a pleasure, and look forward to continuing it, and looking forward to more adventures in Hogwarts.
Such a joy to have you on here, Solomon.
Thank you.
Take care,
you
everyone.
As well. God bless you both and the listeners.